Good morning, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of the Monsters Den. Today, we're going to take a look at a very cool movie produced and released by Universal Pictures back in 1932, talking about murders in the Rue Morgue. Actually, I've got the DVD over there. I'm not going to get up because I got this whole setup here. I want to make sure it works. Anyway, Murders in the Rue Morgue, 1932, Universal, starring none other than Mr. Bela Lugosi in the role of Dr. Miracle. Okay, very strange movie. One that has an interesting history in the kind of universal horror lore. It's based on a story by, of course, Edgar Allan Poe. Pretty twisted film. Film that I think has been quite misunderstood and underrated over the years. You know, it came out hot on the heels of Bela's big success with Dracula. And shortly after, you know, of course, you had Universal's other horror iconic film, Frankenstein. I think the seeds for Murders in the Rue Morgue were actually started before Frankenstein was released, after Dracula and before Frankenstein. And, you know, kind of like all the attention, all the money was going towards the Frankenstein film, and Murders in the Rue Morgue kind of got cast aside. Originally had a budget of over $100,000, and then they actually cut that back to about 90, right? So they started doing plenty of filming on a very, very low budget. Directed by Robert Florey, okay, produced by Carl Laemmle Jr., obviously, screenplay by Tom Reed and Dale Van Every. After the success of Frankenstein, however, Universal was like, whoa, there's still big business in these monster movies, right? Because, of course, Dracula did very well. Then you had Frankenstein, which did even better. So Universal decided, hey, you know what? Let's pump some more money back into Murders in the Rue Morgue. So from a budget of $90,000, just think about that, $90,000. So basically, you know, the salary of someone who makes a decent living nowadays, that was the budget back in 1932 for Murders in the Rue Morgue. So they decided to pump more money back into the film. They did a bunch of reshoots. They added some different scenes, a little more lavish sets and things like that. And before you know it, this budget had ballooned to $186,000. Again, not a lot of money either way you look at it. But, you know, in watching good chunks of this movie, you can see that it was pretty low budget. But I think, as are a lot of films from this time period, very atmospheric. The sets are great. You know, almost the entire film is shot, you know, during nighttime scenes, okay, which just adds to the effect of the whole thing. You got a little young lady laying there, right? Just didn't want to cover her up. I know we can see Bela quite a bit. So, but anyway, so the cast of the movie. So we got Bela Lugosi in the role of the maniacal Dr. Miracle. You have Sidney Fox, very popular actress at the time. She played Camille d'Espagne, okay? You've got Leon Ames, who played her boyfriend Pierre Dupin. Okay, as you can tell, a lot of French names, right? This takes place in France. Pierre and Camille were actually engaged to be married, so they were boyfriend and girlfriend. And Pierre was actually a student. Okay, he was a college student, like a medical student, although he had a kind of detective side to him, as we'll explain a little bit more. And then you had Bert Roach played Paul, who was actually Pierre's best friend and roommate, and Edna Marion, who played Mignette, who was Paul's girlfriend at the time. Various other characters in the film also. You had a character named Janos, who was actually kind of like the minion or servant of Dr. Miracle. So in all these old horror movies, if you had a mad scientist, right, you had to have like an assistant, so to speak. And the assistant either usually was like a demented hunchback or some disfigured guy or something like that. You know, very, very stereotypical of the time. And this guy Janos actually was Dr. Miracle's kind of henchman, so to speak. So basically how the film like starts off, if you got Camille and Pierre are actually going to a kind of like a carnival, like carnival sideshow. So that's how the film begins. And they go, they're working their way through the carnival. And of course you have this one exhibit which talks about, you know, this early man, you know, this type of thing. Come inside and see. And once they're like, oh, let's go check that out. So the two of them, as well as Paul and Mignette, they all go in to see this exhibit. It's Dr. Miracle. And in the cage, he's got Eric. Okay, Eric is basically a gorilla. Okay, but you know, remember, this is supposed to be taking place, you know, way back when. the theory of evolution and, how man became man, very controversial back then. Okay, it's like, what we now know as, man evolved from the apes and all that kind of stuff, and we're all descendants of each other. Back then that stuff was very controversial. So to actually go see a carnival sideshow where some crazy guy's up there talking about how this gorilla in the cage is early man, it's pretty shocking to most people. So at the end of the exhibit, and Lugosi's great up there. Lugosi is great in this role. He's absolutely fantastic in this role. I think he's just, you can tell just how stricken with madness he is at what we'll talk about coming up here. So at the end of the exhibit, the performance, as it will, with not much of a performance, just basically like Dr. Miracle talking to Eric, pretending, he's asking Eric questions. Eric is pretending, or Eric is making these gorilla noises, and, Dr. Miracle is telling the audience, Eric says this and Eric says that, it's whatever. People are shocked. They're like, oh my God, this is, whatever. At the end of the so-called performance, Camille and Pierre actually go up towards the cage because, Camille is like, oh, this poor creature and what have you. And Eric, she's wearing a bonnet. Bonnet was very popular back in the old days. And Eric actually grabs the bonnet off her head and brings it back into the cage. And, and Pierre goes to actually go and grab it. And Eric grabs Pierre through the cage and starts to strangle him. Okay, and Dr. Miracle gets Eric to stop and all that kind of stuff. He's very apologetic, but the bonnet is actually in the cage, and he's all, it's all mangled and what have you. So Dr. Miracle, who obviously there's something going on here. He sees Camille and he takes an interest in her, and he's like, I would like to buy you a new bonnet as a token of, my sorry about what happened. And what is your address so I can go get the bonnet and bring it to your address? And, they're very like, well, no, you don't need to come to our house. They're kind of like, it's kind of weird that he wants to just show up at my house sort of thing. So they basically say, no, it's okay, no, it's okay, no, it's okay. And he's obviously, Dr. Miracle's pretty upset by that. So the reason why he's upset is because what he's been doing behind the scenes is he has been kidnapping like prostitutes and women of the night, okay? Bring him to his laboratory where he has been taking blood from Eric, from the gorilla, and injecting it into the women to try and create like this kind of new race, so to speak. Okay, obviously it's not working, so every time he does the injections, the women die. So he's getting increasingly more pissed off, more upset, more, out of his mind. All right, and he has his sights set on Camille as being his next victim to give this a try with. Okay, so that's how the story kind of unfolds, and he winds up actually following her home, or having, I believe it's Janos follows her home. So he gets the address. He actually shows up, okay, at Camille's house of residence where she lives with her mother, and tries to get her to come with him. She says, no. So, eventually what he winds up doing, because he's like, I have to have her. She's got to be the next one that we experiment on. He winds up sending Eric, lets Eric out of the cage to go to the flat where Camille and her mom live, to go and grab and bring her back. And that winds up actually happening. And in the process, he winds up killing Camille's mother and like stuffing her up a chimney. I mean, there's some really, for the time, for 1932, there's some pretty extreme violence going on in this film. First of all, Dr. Miracle kidnapping these prostitutes and like tying them up in his laboratory, right? And, doing all these experiments on them and injecting them with stuff. It's just like, and they show like one of the women, who's in her death throes, all that kind of stuff, and how he's like all upset that she dies. And, the whole thought of like a gorilla taking a woman and strangling her and stuffing her up in a chimney. Okay. Pretty crazy for the time. So meanwhile, Camille is gone. They don't know where she is, but, Pierre does a little bit of digging on his own, and he has a feeling that something is going on with Dr. Miracle that's not right, and somehow he's behind all this. But they don't know where his secret laboratory is, right? So, the whole rest of the film goes into this kind of like, who done it, where is she at, what is Dr. Miracle up to, and eventually finding the place where he's running all these experiments and being able to go in and find out, where Camille is and all that sort of stuff. So, and a lot of this focuses on the back and forth between Dr. Miracle and Eric. Well, Eric, let's talk about Eric a little bit. So Eric is a gorilla, okay, who's actually been kind of trained and captured by Dr. Miracle. It's obviously a guy in a suit. It's a guy in a, fairly bad gorilla suit, but for, 1932, not too bad. What's interesting is that they decided to, when Flory made this film, instead of because they did a lot of close-up shots and more far-away shots. So, the faraway shots, you actually knew that it was a guy in a gorilla suit, but they never did any real close-ups of the guy in the gorilla suit. Anytime they had to have a close-up shot, what they did was they took actual footage of a chimpanzee, a live chimpanzee, who looked nothing like the guy in the gorilla suit. So you'd see the guy in the gorilla suit from far away. He was kind of big, kind of shaggy, and all that kind of stuff. And then whenever they would show a close-up shot of Eric, it was this fairly hairless, not hairless, but with a lot less hair, adult chimpanzee. They looked nothing alike. And the chimpanzee looked very happy, and it was usually the same shot over and over of him, opening the mouth and all that kind of stuff. And I never thought that made any sense. It's like, if you're going to use a guy in a gorilla suit, use him for the whole film. All right, it's almost like they felt kind of like, yeah, it's kind of cheesy looking, so let's try and make it look a little more real, and interject a shot of a chimpanzee. But you know what? Use a real gorilla. I get it. I know it's 1932. Not a lot was known about gorillas back in 1932. So you either got to make the suit look more like a chimp, or get a real gorilla, or just don't do the live chimpanzee thing, because it didn't make any sense. It kind of takes away from the film a little bit, I think, the continuity. So anyway, to make a long story short, basically how it kind of unfolds from there is you got Pierre going back, going to the police, and saying, I think this Dr. Miracle guy is behind it, we need to find him or whatever. But the police think that Pierre might have been the guy who actually abducted Camille and killed the mother. So he's got to kind of fight for his his innocence here, and convince them that Dr. Miracle is actually the guy behind it. And and it's funny, a lot of these older films, you really see how incompetent they make the police look. The police are taking this guy's word at just about everything. It's not about the evidence, right? Because there really is no evidence. But they're made to look like idiots, and playing the secondary role. And this is not the first. I talked about this a couple weeks ago in the Invisible Man show. Even in that film, the police are made to look pretty idiotic in that film. It's the exact same thing here. But eventually, like I said, they figure out where Miracle is holding Camille, so they storm the laboratory. Okay, they break in. They wind up killing Janos, right, because he's trying to hold them off. They kill Janos. Meanwhile, deep in the laboratory, Eric gets out of his cage, all right, and Dr. Miracle is trying to tell him, Eric, go back in the cage, go back in the cage. I think Eric has had enough of Dr. Miracle, sorry. I'm confused with putting Janos and Miracle together. He winds up killing his owner, his teacher, Dr. Miracle. He then hears what's going on. The cops are coming in, so he grabs Camille and takes her out of the laboratory up to the rooftops. And there, of course, is the chase to go get her. So he's popping along the rooftops. All right. Actually, Pierre winds up being the one to climb up after them. And Eric puts Camille down on top of the roof and goes after Pierre, who winds up shooting Eric. Eric bounces off the roof, falls into the river. Okay. And he goes and rescues Camille. All is well, right? So a film that on the surface doesn't really have a lot of a storyline, but as someone who's watched this movie many, many, many times, I actually, this movie was pretty panned by the critics at the time, and it was not a big moneymaker. The critics called the story pretty lightweight, not a true reimagining of the Poe original story, okay, which quite a lot of differences. And panned a lot of the acting in the film. I will say, I think Sidney Fox overacted a little bit, but I think she was fine in the role. I thought Leon Ames as Pierre did a fine job. I thought all the supporting cast was very good, and I think Lugosi is his kind of maniacal, devilish, evil self, and it's what you want from him. I think for me, it's definitely in my top 5 or 6 Lugosi performances, alongside, the usual suspects, Son of Frankenstein and Dracula, of course, and White Zombie and a couple others. I think it's definitely one of his better ones. He just plays a guy that, absolutely no good. Absolutely no good. Who all he cares about is kind of in his twisted way of kind of putting together, really, what was his purpose here? I mean, that's probably another thing that a little negative you can say about the film. It's like, what did he actually want to do? Did he want to create kind of a new race? All right, it's like, how did he think that this was ever going to work? That he was going to combine the blood of an ape with a female, and all of a sudden come up with this like kind of like super being? I mean, it's never really talks about it much, but he's dead set on doing what he's doing, and then obviously eventually it does not work out that way. So a good film. Like I said, that I've watched many, many, many times, and while it's not an upper echelon Universal horror film from the era, I think it's a very underrated one, and one that I've gone back to many, many times. The Blu-ray is actually very good. I just picked up the recent Shout Factory Blu-ray, and it's well worth getting. So if you haven't checked it out, I would highly agree with it. So there you have it, another Monsters Den episode. We're going to try, over the next couple weeks, I've actually been wanting to dip into some 70s stuff, just take a little bit of a break from like the 30s and 40s, although we have plenty of those left to do. So that'll be coming up soon. So, if you don't see one in a week or two, it just means I got like a lot of other things going on. I have not been watching, again, like I mentioned the other day, all these films that I'm going to be covering in this series, I've seen many times, but being the kind of perfectionist that I am, I like to actually rewatch them again so they're instantly fresh in my mind and then do the show. Okay, so this particular one, so I actually watched Murders in the Rue Morgue a couple weeks ago, but I was thinking of what other one I could do this week, and I knew I was not going to have any time to rewatch something. So I said, you know what, I watched that recently enough where I can kind of do this. So I hope you enjoyed it, right? If you haven't checked out Murders in the Rue Morgue, definitely do. It's a pretty twisted, early 30s horror film that I think a little bit misunderstood at the time, but today it holds up pretty well compared to some of the other films of the era. So visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. We'll see you guys all real soon, all right? Take care, have a good one, bye-bye.